a great and warm welcome to everyone joining us for today's session. My name is Vanessa Buerta. If you don't know me, if you haven't come across me in one of these sessions before, I am the training manager for conflict dynamics, and I will be managing and hosting our session today. And I'm very pleased to be able to, in due course, introduce our speaker to you. But before we do that, just to mention that today is our last Coffee with Conflict Dynamics session for 2025. And so, with that in mind, it's a particularly special event for us. And once again, you are most welcome and thank you for joining us. So hopefully, as always, you have a good cup of coffee or tea in hand, and I invite you to take some time out over the next hour as we receive some valuable insights from today's speaker and we engage as much as we have time for in this hour together. So today, the 25th of November, marks the launch of the annual global campaign of the 16 Days of Activism Against Gender-Based Violence. And this year, the 16 Days campaign is emphasizing the growing threat of what is known as technology-facilitated violence. And so, in support of this, today's discussions are going to specifically focus on, firstly, what this term means. What is technology-facilitated violence? And also, specifically, we want to do some thinking about how the workplace, particularly, of course, South African workplaces, can play a role in this issue and in tackling the challenges that come with this issue. So workplaces are definitely not immune to the growing societal scourge of digital gender-based violence. Unfortunately, increasingly, we hear of cyberstalking, harassment through internal platforms. Sometimes we hear about non-consensual sharing of images and private information, and even things like gender trolling through workplace communication tools. These risks demand some significant collaboration between ER, HR, and IT within organizations in order to create and possibly to strengthen digital safety policies. Those that cover things or tools such as WhatsApp, Slack, MS Teams, Zoom, etc., many others. We really want this to be just the start of an important conversation, an ongoing conversation about how South African workplaces can play a constructive role in dealing with this important topic. So we don't aim today to have all of the answers laid out neatly on the table for ourselves or for you as attendees, but we invite you to begin the conversation with us today and then continue that after today's session, as far as you would be willing to do so. So we will invite you again at the end of today's session to keep talking with us about this important topic. To lead our discussions on this topic, we're privileged to be joined today by a labor expert, Q Moeletsi. Q has been a friend of Conflict Dynamics, a colleague of ours, and a very, very valued and long-standing member of our dispute resolution panel and training panel as well. And I'm delighted to have her here to chat with me today about this topic. Q is a practicing attorney who's specialized in labor law since 2009. She advises clients on a variety of complex labor matters, and she represents clients in multiple forums such as bargaining councils, the CCMA, the Labor Court, the Labor Appeal Court. Now, just before we kick off with our session and I hand over to Q, just to mention that as always, an important part of these sessions is the opportunity for interaction and particularly for Q&A. So If at any point you wish to either make a comment or raise a question on something that Q has been discussing, then please feel free to go into the Q&A function on the Zoom screen, or possibly into the chat function. Either one will do. I will keep an eye out for your questions and comments there. And to the extent possible in the time that we have, I will put as many of your questions as possible to Q for her comment. Also, just to mention, as always, a copy of the slides we're using today and a recording of the full webinar will be made available and sent to all attendees in due course within a few days. Now, just before I do hand over to Q, we'd like to begin the session today with a quick introductory poll just to get some thinking going around this topic. And if I could ask my colleague Craig to launch the poll for us. Thank you so much. So the question on screen is as follows. How familiar are you with the concept of technology facilitated, or otherwise known as digital violence in the workplace? And we'll give a couple of minutes for everyone just to have their say there. Yeah, we have just over half of our participants who have responded. So just another few seconds for others to respond. Craig, I think perhaps if you could put the results up on screen. Excellent. So we have a significant spread here of results, a very even spread. It's good to see that we do have a few people, 19%, 6 out of 31 responses, that say they're very familiar with this concept of technology facilitated or digital violence. Slightly higher, somewhat familiar. Exactly the same amount say they've heard the term but aren't really sure what it includes. And then we've got our highest amount, although not much higher than the others, of 29% saying not familiar at all. So Q, we have a very a very well spread audience, I think, today. In terms of interest in what you have to say. Some people who have great familiarity may well have some stories to share, but I'm going to now turn it over to you and welcome you and say once again, thank you so much for being here. Thanks, Craig. You can remove the poll.
Thank you so much, Vanessa. Thank you for allowing me to have this conversation with you. I think you and I worked so much on harassment this year, and you totally challenged me, having to do some training in Xhosa and Zulu when we were doing training for drivers on harassment. And then Vanessa asked me to present a topic for these webinars. And it so happened that we had so much conversations around issues of harassment, specifically sexual harassment. And given the timing, I think everything just came together. And if anything, there was a theme. Someone said that if you don't do politics, politics will do you. So I think that also applies to technology. If you don't do technology, it will do you. So let me get started, everyone. Brief level, the context to shape the discussions and for us to have some guidance on this topic of technology facilitated violence. We are going to make a lot of reference to the UN Women's work on this subject of technology facilitated violence against women and girls. And that's because, firstly, they've managed to give us a definition that aims to consolidate this conversation. We call it digital violence. Other people have different terminologies to refer to any form of violence that happen over a digital medium or information technology medium. We're going to have that as our guiding framework. We're going to look at our own South African context because obviously that becomes important in further ensuring that we are on the right path. We're going to look at some case law that didn't have to do with the workplace specifically, but it's a good example of where the legislation specifically that deals with cybercrime becomes applicable. And then we're going to take the learnings and hopefully into some conversations about our workplaces. Someone says I'm not audible and they're not sure if it's their system. Vanessa, can you confirm that I am audible?
I can hear you fine, Q.
Okay, I'm not sure if anyone outside of conflict dynamics. Okay, thank you. Thank you so much for confirming that.
Yes, excellent.
So
Thank you, everyone.
Excellent. Thank you. And of course, we're going to have a conversation. This is a coffee session. Glad many of you have come across it. We're going to talk about your current resources. What are you doing in your workplaces in terms of dealing with technology facilitated violence? I mean, we've got the code of good practice. It tells us that we can now deal with some of the harassment that takes place over any digital mediums. We can address them now with in our workplaces. We've got that as a guiding tool, but what else is there, and is there enough focus? I guess the conversation today was to say, is there enough focus on these topics, and are we ensuring that everybody understands what this is? Because when people understand and you're on the same page, I think you're on a path when it comes to prevention. So that's at a high level. I am pressed for time, so I've been told to move a little bit faster today. So my apologies if I move too fast, but it is important that we do have the engagement. So Vanessa will be monitoring the chats and will then bring to fore any information. So what is digital or technology facilitated violence? And I'm going to explain this term of TFVAWG for you. But in context, the examples are, as Vanessa has expressed, a lot of defamation, hacking, stalking, cyber harassment, image and video-based abuse that happen. So this is a nutshell of the realm or the issues that we are tackling, whether they're happening in the context of outside or work environments, but they do tend to present themselves or have linkages, because we've seen things that happen on social media on a weekend land up on the desk in terms of becoming a workplace issue. So whether that's the link, that's one aspect. Thank you, Vanessa. We can move. So I said we will lean a lot on the UN for guidance on this conversation. And there's been a lot, if you go on the internet, as the 20th of November, there was another article that was written where they were raising the alarm of the increase in technology facilitated violence. And were warning particularly around the use of artificial intelligence. The things that have really come up a lot there's a report, a 2024 report that you can Google on the internet, and this is taken from that. It's the UN Secretary General's report. This is just a snapshot from it. It highlighted 3 areas that they said were of real concern in this space. The first area was around the backlash around putting women right issues at the forefront. Of course, there are those males who say, but why? Why do you have to put so much emphasis on issues of women? So there was a huge backlash on all this activism that's happening around the conversations on women. And then the second issue that they raised was the rapid rise of artificial intelligence, the deepfakes, and of course, how images are twisted and so forth. So that was the second issue that was highlighted. And a third issue that they highlighted is what they call the manosphere. And without going into some of the technical terms that they were used to describe this manosphere, what is in essence referred to is a community in this virtual space of individuals who basically perpetuate conversations around sexist stereotypes. So they entrench the sexist stereotypes, and they do this with anonymity. And so it's a lot to do with how the virtual space is used to entrench the inequalities that exist. So those are the three key things that came out from this UN report. And as indicated there is that it was noted that as much as we talk about technology facilitated violence affecting women and girls, there is a disproportionate amount of certain categories of individuals that are most affected. And these were public life figures, journalists, women, human rights defenders, politicians, feminists, activists, and young women and girls. So they noted that these were the ones that were most affected. And we then have some stats in terms of prevalence, which I don't want to deal with. I think the slide has been on for long enough to make that point. We can move, Vanessa. Thank you. So what was important, I guess, to highlight and why this UN reports and everything was important for me is if we want to better understand this topic and for us to have better engagements and frame our conversation is to look at the work they've done. And one thing they were noting now was that in terms of the 2030 agenda that was agreed in 2015, 90% of the measures that they had said they wanted to achieve, it seems that certain states were implementing, with the Asia Pacific region taking the lead. So I think one thing, the lesson was that, this seems to be something that could be managed with enough, of course, will to want to tackle the issues. And I think that is what was important in bringing this conversation to the forefront, is to be able to do that. Okay, let's proceed, V. All right. So in 2021, and it was noted, there was an article talking about this rise in technology facilitated violence against women. And in 2022, eventually, a group of experts, about 29 experts, were convened in the US under the UN Women Program in conjunction with World Health Organization and other organizations. And what they did there was to look at all the definitions that they had for this phenomenon of technology facilitated violence. And of course, we use the word interchangeably of digital violence. And then they decided, having looked at all those, to come with a definition. I'm going to explain shortly why the definition was important, but the definition was also important in our context, I guess, going forward, so we are clear on what the conversation is about. So when we talk about technology facilitated violence against women, we're referring to any act that is committed, assisted, aggravated, or amplified by the use of information communication technologies or other digital tools that results in, or is likely to result in, physical, sexual, psychological, social, political, or economic harm, or other infringement of rights and freedoms. It's a long definition, but I think we all understand and appreciate in the context, in our legal context, that what we're looking for are the elements. So what are the elements? Whenever you have an offense, you will have an offense of someone sending this WhatsApp message to a particular individual. And then you'll come and look at this definition and you will decode the incident with reference to the definition. And you say, assisted, that this person assist, they committed, they're the one who, they're the sender. So we're not dealing with someone who has, forwarded, and what is the medium it was used on the phone and so forth. So you would analyze the definition in that context, and that's how it becomes more applicable and relevant. I don't know if we need a minute, but we can proceed. So in their context, the importance of having a definition, as I said, there was a lot going on in the world, and they started doing work, as you would have seen in the first slide, in about 2015, where they had this 2030 agenda that they put together. But I think there were concerns around, we have so many definitions. Are we gathering the right information? Are we looking at the right things? And this definition became important to guide research and data collection. It became important to support effective policy and legislative development. Policy makers require clear terminology to draft responsive laws. And if you go on the UN site, you can see all the different countries. There's not a lot of data on South Africa, unfortunately, in terms of the stats that's there, but you can see what legislative interventions and other government programs that they have been done around violence against women, and then with some references with regards to digitalization, with reference to the Cyber Crimes Act, which is most referred most in relation to that. The other reason, of course, the definition was drafted widely. It wasn't any specific medium chosen. And they say they wanted to remain relevant as technology evolves. This definition is intentionally simple, clear, and accurate so that it can withstand rapid technology changes and continue to capture new forms of TFVAW. Okay, and the important thing is, of course, to promote shared understanding across sectors. Remember the experts, there were 29 experts that came from various fields in coming together in drafting this, and they wanted to create some level of uniformity across the various, expertise. Thank you, Vanessa. The definition captures primary and secondary perpetrators. I noted this was a key theme even in the development of our legislation. Initially, we had that Electronic Communications and Transaction Act that only looked at the people that created the media content. And then we had the film publication and the cyber crimes that looks at people who also forward the content. So this definition tries to be all encompassing. And we've noted there's a broad spectrum of harm. The first thing when we talk about harm, it grounds the definition in the survivor experience. Those who work in the space of unfair discrimination, and we deal with cases of whether it's bullying or we deal with any of the cases of discrimination, we talk about a subjective and objective element. And the subjective element always begins with how did the complainant feel about something? And of course, we're not surprised then that the definition is with reference to the survivor experience. Physical, sexual, psychological. And we talk about social and political harms, humiliation, exclusion, silencing women online, economic and financial harm. So quite a broad consideration of issues in coming up with a definition that we can now use in looking at these issues. So the work that the UN Women does is grounded in terms of this, technology-facilitated violence. So technology-facilitated violence against women is a subset of the bigger work. So it's important that they still look at it in the broader scope of their work concerning violence against women. And so that remains the key focus on this. And it acknowledges that it affects women in the diversity more. And that's why there's so much focus on this. And gender-based violence can therefore be substituted when appropriate. Thank you. Thank you.
Hugh, sorry, just before you move on, a question has come in that is an interesting one. I'm not sure that we're able to actually answer it fully here, but I thought let me throw it out to you because it goes to the whole discussion around the definition. So Siyabonga has asked the question whether the use of emojis in the workplace amounts to technology harassment or bullying. What do you think about that?
It's interesting, and I think I'd like us to come back to it when we look at the workplaces, because it is about, the information communication technologies. If you look at that definition, where is this information transmitted? We're looking at, and the form that it's transmitted in. So I mean, we look at Judge Benenge, and I don't want to go into too much details. Emojis were a key feature. They had an expert come and decode it. So if we were to look at that, yes, a specific reference to our own South African context with with Judge Benenge inquiry.
Yes, absolutely. Thanks. We'll come back
Thank
to
you.
it if we can, yes.
Thank you. So we now move on to just look at the legal legislative framework. Of course, we are part of a global community. The conversations in our context, in the workplace context, we've had the ILO Convention on Discrimination and the Elimination of Violence, which birthed for us the Code of Good Practice that we have on prevention of harassment in the workplace, which came into effect in 2022. So, of course, we've got the Constitution. They're really a myriad of legislation that's applicable. I mentioned the Electronic Communications and Transactions Act. There are sections there that deal with cyber crimes and the film and publication. And I mentioned that there was a movement from the electronic communication which looked at the creator of the content, and the film and publication looked at the creators of content and those who disseminate, because it focuses on even where you have whatever video images and they are and how they when they are distributed and impact on children and so forth. So we also have the Protection from Harassment Act. That's obviously applicable outside the context of the workplace, but is there to regulate and address issues of harassment. And the Cyber Crimes Act, which I mentioned has been used by South Africa as part of the tools that they are applying in addressing technology facilitated violence in the South African context. And that's because that legislation, regulates issues of, the dissemination of video images that impact on dignity and so forth. And in general, we'll look at a case that actually makes specific reference to better understand that specific question. Okay, we can then move, Vanessa. Okay. So these pieces of legislation I've briefly covered, and the Cyber Crimes Act, the Electronic Communications Act, the Film and Publications Act, the Display of Certain Materials, and the Protection from Harassment Act, which are applicable to everyone, is the important context. And then we can move on to start looking at what is applicable in our workplace context. Of course, in our workplace context, we've got the Employment Equity Act, which prohibits harassment in general. We've got a code of good practice that makes specific reference to cyberbullying. I think it's paragraph 4.11 that makes specific reference to cyberbullying. And of course, an employer has an obligation to create a safe and environment for its workers. And I guess when we talk about violence and the violence in the workplace, that I think still hits on your obligations there. In our employment context, there are many issues that may arise from any incident that happens. I guess that's a conversation for another day. One of the things when I was preparing for this talk, I was doing a sexual harassment matter where I was the chairperson and the HR person who had investigated one of their sexual harassment allegations testified that there had been numerous complaints, and some of them were on WhatsApp, but the WhatsApps were deleted. So you do have, the impact that arises from some of these matters that we deal with that touch on technology. So it's a conversation, I guess, for another day. But we note that these are some of the issues that may come up and are related to the topic at hand. All right. Thank you, Vanessa. So we have our code of good practice when we deal with these issues in the context of the workplace, because the code has a clear recognition that harassment can be facilitated through use of electronic equipment and digital platforms, right? So we acknowledge that, we acknowledge that there is this problem that we need to deal with. I guess today's conversation is meant to say, given that we acknowledge it, are we highlighting this problem enough? Do we have, are we applying enough resources? Our policies clearly outlining this topic? Do people clearly understand? And you'll see when we get to the end and make some recommendations what I mean by these questions. As I've indicated, there is specific reference to cyberbullying in the code. So the problem is acknowledged and GBV. And the thing about, obviously, when we deal with these issues of gender-based violence or harassment, when it is rooted in the issues of structural inequality and patriarchal norms, as noted in that reference to these cyber groups that have created this manosphere. It's called manosphere, yes, where they say the narrative is all about, portraying women in a certain way, but it's all about entrenching these patriarchal norms. Thank you, Vanessa. Not sure if I've got any questions, but we'll get ready with the poll.
Yeah, let's go into our second poll. Thank you, Craig. So we're asking you here, in the past 12 months, have you encountered either directly or indirectly any form of technology facilitated or digital violence in your workplace? And we would welcome your responses to this. Yes, so we have a significant number of people who've participated, but perhaps just a few more, a few seconds more for the last few people. Okay, so 73% of people have responded here, and I guess it's welcome and comforting to see that the majority of people who have responded are saying that they have never in the past 12 months encountered technology facilitated violence. Followed relatively closely by people saying rarely, so there has been a sense of it, but not a significant one. And just 2 out of 33 responses saying yes, frequently, but those two are worth noting, I think. And occasionally we had 3 out of 33 people saying that yes, they've experienced this occasionally or encountered it. Thank you, Craig.
Thank you, Vanessa. Thank you. Um, We're going to talk about a case that happened in South Africa where quite a significant amount was awarded in damages. But I think for this purpose, I just wanted to highlight that there are many engagements and there are many conversations. And as recent as when I said in my introduction, as the 20th of November, which was, I think, last week, the UN was highlighting that AI and anonymity are fueling a surge in digital violence against women. And I'm sure we've seen a lot in terms of our, public figures that have gone to court to defend themselves over things that have been done in the social media context. Of course, there are always two things to these things, is that at times people are not aware that this is what that conduct may be. So people are not aware that what I experience perhaps is technology facilitated violence. And in certain instances, there are power relations that impact on people reporting cases. So whenever we look at research and data, we always take into account there might be many variables that are applicable. Vanessa, I see on your side the slide is not showing the stats. Okay, there we go. From the research that they had done, the UN, they noted about 38% of women have experienced online violence, um, personally experienced it. And then there were 85% who have witnessed it. I'm sure we all witnessed it. There's something called Sunday Twitter or something. It's called X now. I'm revealing my age. So we also see that up to 95% of what this content looks like, we've got deepfakes where non-consensual pornographic images have been shared. And that now, and then we also see that 99% of those targeted are women. And hence the issue and the conversation about, is there anything wrong with continuously flagging issues that affect specifically women, or women and girls. And as you've noted, when I started, I indicated in terms of that 2024 UN Secretary General report, they noted that there was a huge backlash concerning efforts that try to put women's rights at the fore. And I mean, personally, when I have done proposals to companies to do training on sexual harassment, some of the conversation is, can we not call it sexual harassment? Can you let's come up with a word because we don't want to put it like that. And certainly when I've done the training, it's been said to me, I note that many of the cases that you're making references to are only in relation to men being perpetrators. But you do know that women can be perpetrators. And I said, of course, I know that women can be perpetrators of sexual harassment. However, when I'm talking, I'm making reference to case law. I'm making references, to that data, one that's widely publicly available and authoritative in terms of the conversation. But that does not mean the fact that we're having this conversation about women, the fact that we having, because in some instances people will say, no, please don't cover sexual harassment, cover bullying, cover racial, ethnic, but we've done enough work on sexual harassment. And as I start talking and I make one reference to sexual harassment, and I open this whole can of worms. So it really is interesting because I think these issues are there, and whether we like it or not, they exist and they're at the forefront. Okay, we can move, Vanessa. So in this, I found this case very interesting. This case is an example of applying the legal principles to a case involving a woman who was a victim of cyber abuse. The plaintiff, and in this case, brought a case against the ex-boyfriend and the wife of the ex-boyfriend. The abuse included recording of intimate images of the plaintiff. The gentleman created a false Facebook profile, posting recording and derogatory comments to her friends and colleagues, which were deemed to be harmful to her personal and professional images, emailing her superiors concerning, in one email, it was about the fact that she cannot be a person of stature if she could get involved with a married man. And so the attack was about the fact that she had dated this married man. And to her defense, she said, I didn't know he was married when I was dating him. And in actual fact, what made the wheels come off was the fact that she broke up with the gentleman when she discovered he was married. And he persisted, kept coming to her work, persisted doing all of these things. And the wife joined in, being part of the scorned relationship. So the court referenced a number of sections. There was also reference to Section 11 of the Cyber Crimes Act and the Section 16 of the Cyber Crimes Act, which criminalizes the unlawful and intentional disclosure of intimate image without consent, especially when it violates the victim's sexual integrity or dignity. It highlighted the severe physical, emotional, and mental health impact on the victim, including PTSD and an inability to work, which would then explain the total damages of 3.5 million, which were made up of in relation to various claims. I mean, the order says that the total amount is 3.55 550, sorry. to be exact, million. And it was made up of different, so each claim, there was a claim A where 250 in general damages was allowed, 250,000 was given, and there was 2.5 million in general damages in relation to claim B. So this in total, when we make a reference to that, it was in total, but it was broken down in relation to the different claims that she had brought. Okay. So a lot of this is happening in our space. I mean, what is also you would have seen in the news, which I found also interesting, is some UK articles. They talk about the police are investigating a virtual sex assault on a girl's avatar. I'm not sure if everyone knows, but an avatar, even on WhatsApp, they say which avatar, so which cartoon image you want to choose to be your profile. So that is interesting. And then there is an allegation of a girl who was raped in the metaverse. And the question is this the beginning of a dark new future? And of course, Amnesty International, which many years I was a non-executive director of in the South African region, also raising an alarm on online abuse against women. So it is a human right issue that is at the forefront. And that's why it intrigues me. Are we having enough conversation? I'm asking you in the workplaces if this is a huge human rights issue.
Right, so let's give everyone an opportunity to have their say again. And so, Craig, would you give us our third poll, please? So we want to start talking about an organization's response to this growing threat. And the question is, how confident are you that your organization's existing policies and procedures adequately address technology facilitated or digital violence? Okay, I think we've got most of the responses that we are likely to get. So, it seems there's a fair amount of neutrality around the effectiveness of existing policies and procedures. Unfortunately, very few people feel very confident about existing policies. Of course, we can't be sure whether that means that people are saying there simply are no policies around in the workplace that address this issue, or whether existing policies are simply not sufficient. Yeah, a fairly even spread there, Q, of responses, and a significant number of people who are expressing a lack of confidence in what is already in the workplace. So with that in mind, let's talk further about the possible role of policy and procedure.
Thank you. Thank you, Vanessa. We begin, of course, as I said, where we're going to take some guidance from. So the UN Women emphasizes that prevention must go beyond punishment. Our workplace is not famous for punishment. We pull out that policy when you have posted something on social media. You should have known that there's a social media policy. You are charged with violating the social media policy. Instead, it calls for companies to hire more women in tech development. Build safer platforms. Our teams, you remember what Slack and the platforms we use safe. Remove harmful content swiftly. I mean, one of the things that came up a lot in our training with the bus drivers when we did that, I mean, how many workshops did you do? 20. Was a lot to do with inappropriate content that people were posting on the WhatsApp, in the work WhatsApp group. And how, in the responses from some of the workers when you did those things were, Admin must remove this person. Admin, a lot of responsibility was placed on admin, not on individuals who were posting the information, but how admin must make sure that content that they don't like is removed. And embed accountability into AI design. So I'm going to read this without interrupting myself. The UN Women emphasizes that prevention must go beyond punishment. It calls for companies to hire more women in tech development, build safer platforms, remove harmful content swiftly, and embed accountability into AI design. The UN also stresses investment in digital literacy. Yeah? Some of the recommendation I did research, it talked about the onboarding. Are we talking enough about technology facilitated violence in those onboarding processes? Do people understand and appreciate that even commenting something where it's a personal view, maybe entrenching what we said, this now menopause, this community that seeks to twist every narrative about women. If a woman posts a certain image, then the image, that entrenches the patriarchal views, especially for young people. So digital literacy is important, especially for young people, and culture change programs that challenge toxic online communities, including the growing manosphere. So that's the first guidance. Importantly, we've got a judgment that related to a PRASA where Mushwana J said the only practical step, so in analyzing the sexual harassment case and in ascertaining the liability of the employer in terms of whether or not it appropriately taken the right steps in dealing with the complaint of sexual harassment, he said the following: the only practical step to be taken by an employer to ensure employees do not contravene the law is to adopt employment policies like a sexual harassment policy. This is not the only thing he said, but he did emphasize, because I think it was missing in this context of PRASA, that a clear sexual harassment policy. So, from this judgment, we take the importance of policies. Our policies that we have, of course, we've got the disciplinary policy and procedure that will tell us what is regarded as offenses. We've got codes of conduct and ethics and value statement. Our value statement, which will be respectful. But, am I going to interpret that it means that when I make my own comments digitally, I'm not being respectful? Obviously, people, that come into a workplace, will behave akin to also where they come from. Their society does shape their viewpoints. So as much as you have that respect value statement, there might be questions about whether this conduct is not in line with that value statement. And that's why you would have a conversation about what is acceptable and what that means. We have information and communication technology policies, data protection policies, harassment policy, social media policy, remote work and work from home policy, electronic monitoring and surveillance policy. I had an observation and a thought about these policies when I thought about, how these policies are drafted versus the conversation we are having. I don't know if anyone else is having a similar feeling as they read this and they think about these policies, whether in the context of this conversation, what it is that they focus on versus what we try and focus on the agenda around gender-based violence. I mean, this is primarily part of this conversation we're having today. Any observations or comments? We're practically at the end of this talk, so I won't be running out of time in asking this question. But let me maybe finish and we can come back to it. We can
before you carry on, I just want to share that Siyabonga in the chat has very much reiterated the thinking of those who voted in the poll that there's a great lack of policy and procedure on this topic. Perhaps specifically with the word relevant, there, a great lack of relevant policy and procedure on the topic. And perhaps before you carry on and before we lose it, a while ago, Estelle raised a question around gaslighting
Mm.
And so she asks, where do you think gaslighting comes into this whole discussion? I don't know if you would have any thoughts about that, or if anyone else does.
Yeah. So the interesting there was a video playing on X. I must stop calling it Twitter, on X, where this lady is standing and she put a 2 liter Coke, I think, behind her, and then she's on the phone. And someone removes that 2 liter Coke, right? And then she's on the phone, and then now she needs to go. So she's turning to pick up this thing, and then she turns, and this Coke 2 liter is not there, right? And then she's like, okay, what's going on? And she's puzzled, but she's on the phone. And then in a quick split, someone puts the Coke back there. And then she goes there and she's like, oh, my Coke is still here. And then she continues talking. And then again, she just needs and she continues walking, and I don't know, but she looks back and the Coke is not there. So someone commented and said this is the best example of gaslighting. Because the conversation comes up as what is gaslighting, and it's that for me, as I understand it, so that I answered this question in the right context, is where the psychological influence, something is like this as a fact, but you're meant to doubt a fact, essentially. Estelle's, it's something along those lines. So this lady in this example knew she placed the Coke there. She knew it was there. She saw it was there. And then next thing, she's on the phone, and then she's, basically, let's say someone asked her, where's the Coke? And she said, the Coke is right there. And then the person looks and says, no, the Coke is not there. And she's like, but what do you mean the Coke is not there? I put the Coke there and I saw it. And when she turns around, the Coke is there. But, every time the other person comes, the Coke is not there. But she knows for a fact that she went to the shop, she bought the Coke, she knows where she placed it. And every other moment she looked at this. So she knows as a fact. But it seems that when someone else comes or when anything else happens, they say the Coke is not there. Okay. So that is an example of, if I can call it, of the conduct. Technology facilitated violence, as we've seen, is a lot to do with the mediums and the platforms that are used to perpetuate that violence, if I can put it that way. And I think the deepfakes and the things that are created where what the reality is, but and one of the examples that was highlighted is there's a lot of misinformation, and that's it's the where the platform where that information is delivered, that then becomes the real issue. I hope, Vanessa, I'm explaining it correctly. It's clear in my mind, but I'm not
Well,
sure what's coming.
yeah, no, thanks for that, Q, because I think using that example was extremely useful of the video with the Coke. And in fact, Estelle has responded to say that what you've explained makes perfect sense. Of course, there can be, we don't have the time to go into that in great detail now, but there can be a huge amount of discussion as to how gaslighting can actually present itself in a workplace context as well. I think, we tend to talk about it mainly in the context of personal relationships, but there's plenty to be said potentially about gaslighting in workplaces.
Mm.
Ondiswa has just added to this discussion and says that regarding gaslighting, there will always be triggers that we must control and manage our response and stick to our values and opinions.
Mm.
Thanks for that comment, Ondiswa.
Yeah.
So let me let you continue. Sorry, Q, to
No problem.
finish up. We have one last poll that we wanted to fit in before wrapping up today. And the question here is, who in your organization plays the greatest role in identifying and preventing technology facilitated or digital violence? Okay, so we've got a fair number of people who've responded. 78% of our participants have responded. And I have to be honest, Q, I don't know about you, but I don't think I'm surprised that the greatest percentage of responders have indicated that employees are kind of left by themselves to deal with this or
Mm,
to identify and try to prevent this type of violence. It is encouraging, though, to see that there is a representation of 34% saying that HR or ER have a role to play, and then a pretty even spread between line managers, IT, and senior leadership. And it is telling to note as well. I think that three people have said that it's very unclear, and there is no one who is
mm,
looking out for this.
yeah.
So thank you,
Interesting.
Craig.
Thank you. And really, as we said, we didn't have this webinar to necessarily give you the answers to these things. We ourselves are gathering information and hope we will work together to develop, you know, better guidelines in terms of how perhaps employers should approach this specific issue. So, I mean, this is just also some suggestions and thinking about how employers go about it so that people wouldn't say we shortchanged them in this hour. So we were under pressure to deliver when we made these recommendations, guys. So, but I really hope they will form part of whether it is LinkedIn comments on feedback on this specific topic or reaching out to Vanessa, whatever you decide to do. But let's keep the conversation going. So, some suggestions were, I guess, companies talk a lot about what they discovered. When I go and do certain trainings and things, they say, well, it came out of our employee engagement that, this was an area we needed to look at. So I guess the proposal then for those who have the resources and capability, because this is obviously not, applies to everyone. Those who do that can do that and try and understand the prevalence. Of course, look at your policies. We've looked at those myriad of policies, but my observations of these policies were a lot to guard and protect the organization. So that's why they don't delve into the detail of what the human to human contact and where the impact would be on the individuals would be, and we would have greater examples because a lot of it is designed and looking at it from a perspective of what are the things that create risk and how do we solve those risks in the wider scope, while we're talking about a lot with the human. Yes, the organization is at risk, of course, when certain things happen, but that's just one part of it. I mean, I know in one HR thing they said, what happens when someone applies for a protection order against a colleague in the workplace? So there can end up being impact on the workplace. Then you have to enforce a protection order, and hopefully one wants to prevent someone having to apply for a protection order and finding yourself in trying to enforce a protection order of an issue that you could have clarified and prevented. Is in a nutshell what the conversation. Act decisively, of course, you have to do that. Section 60 liability for employers if you don't deal with harassment as it happens. And of course, you must annually or every 6 months when something happens, review and revise your strategies in line with whatever technology. When new resources come, when new technology come. I mean, a friend of mine, I'd asked him to do a video for me for this talk, and he said, Q, right now we are busy with creating the AI that allows me to use your exact voice. I can't participate and help you with any video on the topic you want to do because this is my space and this is what we're looking at, and I'm worried that some of the things you are saying here go against what we do. So there's a lot of technology happening, and as I said, they said if you don't do politics, politics will do you, and I think the same can be said about technology. Let's continue the conversation. Thank you. This is the last part from my side. Over to you, Vanessa.
Thanks so much, Q. Perhaps just as a last comment from drawing comments from the participants, Charmaine is saying that we definitely need more educating in the workplace on this topic of technology facilitated violence against women and girls, and considering the various forms of it. For example, how gaslighting can feature in the workplace. And even the issue that was raised earlier, just what we tend to see as small issues but can be very big issues, use of emojis and all that comes in between those practices. So thank you so very much. Thank you to everyone who has joined us here today for our last session of the year. We truly do appreciate your spending this hour of your time with us. Please don't hesitate to reach out to us at Conflict Dynamics. If you wish to continue this conversation, if you have anything that you'd like to raise for specific focus in a future session, if you would like to make contact with Q about any specific point that she's raised in this session, you know where to find us. Please make that contact. And if anyone is interested in participating in a working group of sorts on this particular topic, we would also welcome hearing from you. And we'd be more than happy, Q and I, to work to put together a working group on this specific issue as it impacts on the workplace. Finally, holiday season is coming up. And so, from all of us at Conflict Dynamics, we obviously want to wish you a very blessed and a very safe and hopefully a restful holiday season. And we very much look forward to seeing you again in 2026 for our first session of the year. You'll be hearing from us for our next coffee session in February 2026. Thank you, everyone,
Thank
and
you.
goodbye.
Goodbye. Thank you, Vanessa.